Kentucky, it's the land of horses, bluegrass, and bourbon. But novelist Kristin Harmel, our travel gal, is here to tell us why it's also the perfect place for a girl's getaway or the perfect place for a romantic weekend. Good morning, Kristin.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in. This is fun. Okay, so what is there to do besides drink bourbon in bourbon country?
Well, that's a great question. I would actually start your trip in Louisville, which is the largest city in Kentucky. It's an easy, very easy city to fly into.
But not the capital, as Mitch will tell you.
Absolutely,
It's not the capital.
absolutely. You're right. Good piece of trivia.
Yeah.
But there's quite a lot to do there. First of all, one of the best hotels in the country is actually in Louisville.
Oh.
It's called the 21C Museum Hotel. You're actually staying in a modern art museum, which is so cool.
Wow, that is cool.
Yes, I mean, there's nightlife there, there's restaurants, there's just plenty of stuff to do. Plus, as you probably know, Louisville's the home of the Kentucky Derby.
There you go. And you mentioned Churchill Downs, you mentioned the Derby. What if you're not there in May, though, for all the races?
Well, it's a great question. There are races other times a year. And in fact, I was there in November and we did night racing, which is called Downs
that's
After
cool.
Dark. It's really cool. It's not just racing, but they also have like drinking and like bands. And it's just kind of like a night out. And you just happen to be an amazing racetrack.
You still have the big hats on, or no?
No,
Leave those
you
at
actually,
home.
yeah, exactly. No need for the big hats unless you would like to wear them.
Okay. You mentioned great restaurants. Where should we eat?
You know, Louisville, surprisingly, I mean, it surprised me, is really a foodie city. So there are places like Proof on Main, which is actually in the 21C Museum Hotel. They're doing some amazing inventive things with cocktails, with food. It was a fantastic meal that I had there. There are some districts in Louisville that we'll talk about on GalTime.com that you can go for great food. And there's also a place called Hillbilly Tea that I would strongly, I know it's a funny name, but I would strongly recommend it for breakfast. I had a bourbon bread pudding there with like a meringue crust on it that was probably one of the best things I've ever eaten at the breakfast table. Yeah, amazing.
All right. And then, of course, you mentioned the nightlife at the Churchill's Downs, but then there's some other things to do, too.
There's lots of stuff to do in Louisville at night. In fact, I wish I had more time there. And in fact, I would certainly go back and do it again. There's something called the Urban Bourbon Trail, which I would highly recommend. It's sort of a great way to sort of get your bourbon juices flowing, I suppose you could say.
All right.
You get a passport, and it sends you to some of the best bourbon bars in Louisville. And by best bourbon bars, I mean bars that stock a lot of bourbon, a lot of varieties of bourbon, and where the bartenders are very educated about bourbon. So it's a great way to sort of begin to expand your bourbon palate before you hit the actual bourbon trail, which we'll talk about in the next hour. But there's also a place called 4th Street Live. Some of the bars on the bourbon trail are on 4th Street Live, and that's sort of the nexus of the entertainment district there in
Southern
Louisville.
bar hopping. I like it in Kentucky. Hey, thank you so much.
Thank
and of course, Kristin will be back next hour to talk about visiting bourbon distilleries. In the meantime, you know where to go. Visit GalTime.com right now to find out more information about hanging out in Kentucky.